religion has a central piece of folklore that is attached to it, that is taken to heart and repeated as canon. The Christians have the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Buddhists have Siddhartha Gautama reaching enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. The Muslims have Muhammad ascending into heaven, and the psychedelic people, of course, have Bicycle Day.
Bicycle Day, of course, being the day of April 19th, 1943, when Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman took the first LSD trip, riding his bicycle home, completely terrified. But the story of LSD goes back a few years earlier. Hoffman originally synthesized LSD back in 1938 when he was working for a pharmaceutical manufacturing company called Sandoz Laboratories. He had been studying ergo, which is a parasitic fungus that grows on grain, mostly rye. Sandoz first became interested in ergo because of its traditional use as a folk remedy used to constrict blood vessels to lessen bleeding. It was also associated with a plague called St. Anthony's Fire. There are chronicles dating back to the Middle Ages, telling of villages where almost everyone went insane for a few days, and limbs went gangrenous after ergo-ridden grain was milled into flour and baked as bread.
Dr. Hoffman first synthesized LSD in 1938 when he was researching the chemical properties of ergo. It was the 25th in a series of ergo derivatives that he concocted, hence the name LSD 25.
Preliminary studies didn't prove significant, and interest in LSD was quickly lost, and it sat in a little vial on a shelf collecting dust, until one fateful afternoon, Hoffman decided to pull it off the shelf on April 16th, 1943. He claims that it gave him a strange feeling, and that it would be worthwhile to carry out more profound studies with this compound. It was as if the acid gods were smiling down at him, whispering that it was time. It was discovered at around the same time the atom bomb was being developed, and some came to see it as a spiritual antidote to it. While he was making new acid, some got on his fingertips, and he was quoted as saying that he felt a remarkable but not unpleasant state of intoxication, characterized by an intense stimulation of the imagination and an altered state of awareness of the world. He lay in astonishment for about 3 hours until it wore off. On April 19, 1943, Dr. Hoffman dosed himself with about 250 micrograms of LSD, which is about 3 hits. He thought that such a low dose would have negligible results, but he was wrong, and he would soon see how wrong he was. As he started to ride his bicycle home with his laboratory assistant in tow, it started to kick in. He started having trouble speaking, and objects started to be distorted. He had a feeling when he was riding his bicycle that he was unable to move it, like he was riding a stationary bike. But his assistant told him later that he was moving along at a good pace. But this is why we call the day Bicycle Day. When Hoffman got home, he consulted his doctor, who checked him out and gave him the okay. But Hoffman was still really out of his head at this time. It was really scary. You have to imagine what this must have been like. He was thinking, is this gonna be the new normal? Am I just gonna be tripping forever? What is this? What is happening to me? He had some out-of-body experiences, and as the trip wore on, and after he started to peak and he got his mind around his ability to hear colors and see sounds, he finally just crashed right out. Right from the get-go, he realized that this stuff was a great tool for figuring out how the mind works. And he was pleased to find out that the company he was working for decided that was the direction they wanted to take with LSD. The results of a study done on the psychological properties of LSD was presented in the Swiss Archives of Neurology in 1947. It was reported that LSD produced disturbances in perception, hallucinations, and acceleration in thinking. The medical community started to take notice of the stuff, and unfortunately, so did the CIA. The CIA was interested in using LSD as a kind of truth serum. When it was proved that that wouldn't work, they tried to use it as an anti-truth serum. And when that didn't work, they still kept it on and experimented with it extensively. They began to employ it as an interrogation aid. Only a small amount of scientists in the United States were engaged in psychedelic drug research. LSD research was considered a brand new field of experimental psychiatry. There was little private or public support for it. The people at the CIA saw a great opportunity and ran with it. Their budget at the time was huge, and they were in a position to make the careers of scientists whose skills could benefit them. Grants started pouring in for LSD research.
First, the CIA administered LSD to CIA trainee volunteers. It was felt that it would provide a good opportunity to see how anxiety-prone these people were.
Over the next few years, CIA agents tried LSD repeatedly. They were interested in psychiatric reports that claimed that it could break down familiar personality traits. They thought they could use it to brainwash people. They thought they could use LSD to break someone down and tame them, but it didn't work. And the CIA grudgingly gave up the use of LSD as a brainwashing drug, though not before testing it on tons and tons of unwilling subjects. The super-duper secret MKUltra program was run by a relatively small unit within the CIA called the Technical Services Staff. MKUltra would go on to become a mammoth undertaking. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who directed the MKUltra program, had approved a plan to give acid to unwilling citizens. Gottlieb knew there was a difference between testing LSD in a lab and using the drug in actual operations on people who had no idea they were on acid. Everyone in the CIA Technical Services program took acid. They took turns tripping alone or in groups. They would go off together, usually 2 at a time, analyzing each other and taking notes. Once they got the hang of how to properly trip on acid, they started to slip acid in each other's drinks without warning. As soon as the drug was ingested, a colleague would tell them so they could make preparations. You know, hey, you've been dosed. You're not going anywhere for a while. Now we're going to mess with you.
At first, the people involved in the MKUltra project just kept their experiments in-house, but then they started to branch out to other agency personnel. It got to the point where anyone in the agency would be fair game for a surprise acid test.
The MKUltra program started to become pretty unhinged with all the acid going around. The Office of Security came down on them when they heard of an attempt to spike the punch bowl with LSD during the Christmas party. The Fun and Games claimed their first victim when Dr. Frank Olson, an Army scientist, killed himself after falling into a deep depression after he was dosed with acid at a conference. There's also strong evidence showing that he was murdered. Unshaken, the MKUltra program moved on with its next phase, where unwitting targets would be given LSD unwittingly. George Hunter White was selected to head the operation. He was an old-fashioned narcotics officer. He rented an apartment in Greenwich Village and transformed it into a safe house with two-way mirrors and surveillance equipment. He would pose as an artist and a seaman and take people back to his pad and secretly slip them some LSD. Bad reactions were frequent, and you can probably guess why. He initiated a program called Operation Midnight Climax while stationed in San Francisco. He would have drug-addicted prostitutes pick up men from the bars and bring them back to a CIA-financed bordello where unknowing clients would be slipped LSD as they were observed from a two-way mirror. The safe house experiments went on uninterrupted until 1963, when the CIA Inspector General John Ehrman came across them during a routine inspection of TSS operations, and he shut them down immediately.
The CIA's experimentation with LSD plays out like something in a bad frat party. A bunch of squares acquire the key to the universe, and what do they do with it? They use it to go about finding every way they can to mess with people.
and that's probably where it would have stayed if Captain Alfred M. Hubbard hadn't got a hold of it. He was the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. He was a little blustery guy who was convinced that LSD had transcendental potential. He had been a former OSS guy during World War II and had powerful connections. He made it his life's work to get as many men and women as possible to take LSD. He had been introduced to LSD by a doctor friend of his over in the UK in 1951. After taking it, he claimed the visions he got while on it were, quote, "the deepest mystical thing I've ever seen," unquote. Hubbard was interested in LSD's potential as a therapeutic agent, so he contacted Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who was a British psychiatrist working with LSD and mescaline at Weyburn Hospital in Saskatchewan, Canada. Like many other researchers in the field, Osmond was primarily interested in psychosis and mental illness. He was interested in psychedelics because he thought they replicated psychosis. He suggested that mescaline could be used as a tool for training doctors, nurses, and other hospital personnel to understand their patients on a more intimate level. Osmond's research attracted widespread attention. The CIA caught wind of it and sent informants out to Weyburn Hospital. Osmond and his cohorts had no idea, but throughout the next decade they were contacted on repeated occasions by agency personnel. It's been said that it was impossible for an LSD researcher not to have contact with someone from the agency during the height of LSD research. Osmond's reports also grabbed the attention of Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. When Huxley got wind of Osmond's reports, he volunteered as a guinea pig. And this is where we start to see LSD branch out into the wider world. It started, of course, with a few doctors, intellectuals, and of course the spy community. And from there it would branch out to people who may or may not have been ready for it. And it would become a big psychedelic demon monster that popular society would have to tackle. After intellectuals like Huxley started to write about and popularize psychedelics like LSD, lesser writers would experiment with it and get excited and try to bring it to the masses, a world that wasn't quite ready for it. LSD would go on to be abused, and it would soon become illegal. What started out as a powerful tool for people to better understand the world and themselves, brought to us via the unlikely dark world of the spy community, had frightened too many square people for it to sit right with them. And that's why we can't have nice things here on our terrifying world.